Here we are again at Kirtland Trails in the Sunday morning at about 10:30 a.m. I decided to come back here on a morning of rain and cloudiness and mugginess, but it's not terribly hot. I think it's like in the low 70s. But something made me feel this is the right place to come to this morning, and so I'm here. And I think today I have something particular I wanted to start off talking about. And it's Mary Oliver, the poet Mary Oliver, who I admire greatly and have always loved her poems of nature. Is from Ohio, Maple Heights, Ohio, I believe. And she passed away in 2014. And she won a Pulitzer Prize for poetry, and I believe it was 1984, and National Book Award in 1992 at a very older age. She was not really respected very much as a poet earlier in her life, and she had a traumatic upbringing where she was sexually abused by her father at a young age. I don't think anyone totally knows the details of that, but she wrote some about it. And I think she wrote a poem about her parents once that was not very, I don't know, didn't express a lot of love, I guess. And then, she was with her partner Molly of many years. She lived in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which in the 60s and 70s was sort of a beatnik hippie hangout, I guess you'd say. And I don't know what it's like today. It sounds like actually a very interesting town. A lot of artists flocked to that area. She lived there for many years, I think until, I don't know, in the 80s, for sure, I believe. And I don't know, she moved to Florida towards the end of her life with another partner, Anne, I believe, that was not not as beneficial, I guess you'd say. And the reason I know some of this about her life is that I just started watching a very good documentary about her that just came out in earlier July, called Mary Oliver, Saved by the Beauty of the World, which I think is a great title. And I haven't finished it all because I had some other things to do, plus I wanted to try to get out today before it really started raining. I didn't escape the sprinkles, but maybe I'll escape the full force of the rain that may come later. But I've been looking forward to watching this movie. I don't watch a lot of TV and movies. Occasionally I do, but this is one that stuck out at me when I heard it was coming out, because I've always appreciated Mary Oliver's poetry. I've always liked the fact that she came from Ohio, and I always felt a kinship with her beyond just that, with her love of nature. She was sometimes described as a nature poet, which from my understanding she didn't like that label, because poetry is poetry, right? But to label it based on the content, it's kind of a superficial way of looking at her poems, because her poems are always so much more deep than that. I mean, they often talk about human elements related to nature and comparisons between nature and our human being and psychology, and intertwined. But she often did emphasize that, similar to what I always say, what everyone recognizes, that we may be losing our relationship with nature from all the urbanization, and that if we do, it's to our own detriment. So she was very much a person who could almost be regarded as spiritual or mystical, in that she was trying to remind us of our connection with nature. She was very observant in nature, and many of her poems are definitely themed around nature. I mean, one of my favorites is A Summer's Day, which ends with a somewhat infamous line that says, "Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And you know, it's so moving. I mean, that entire poem is transcendent, I would say, in a way. I mean, it talks about paying attention, you know, which I guess I never realized how much she talked about paying attention, which is a common theme of everything that I've talked about, and a common theme of those who I would say have a truly religious mind, who understand. And I think a lot of poets do sometimes have that mind of understanding that paying attention is the most important element of the truly religious mind. To see things as they are, not the way we imagine them to be in our head, to get out of all image making and beliefs and just get in the natural world and observe this natural world. There is nothing more religious than that. To see this world for what it is. There's some deer, two male deer over there. There is nothing more religious than that. How can there be? How can you claim to know yourself and know this world if you never step outside your door or walk outside an urban area and become familiar with the natural world that you come from? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. There's no way to understand who you are without understanding nature. There's no way for us to live without living in nature. We may forget that connection and become so far removed from it, but somebody somewhere is growing your food, right? Which comes from nature. The water we drink, all this stuff, we get so far removed from it to where you go to a grocery store and buy your groceries and don't think of where that food's coming from. And I think very much to the detriment of our understanding of our relationship with nature. And I've talked about that endlessly, and I probably will continue to talk about that endlessly, because it is maybe the biggest problem that we have. And someone like Mary Oliver can remind us of things we've forgotten. And when I read her poems, it reminds me of things I've forgotten. And that we all know is there, but we don't pay attention to it. And I think that's the poet's job, is to remind us of what we could be or should be and can be paying attention to. All of us. If you just spend the time out in nature, walking, observing, stopping to look at what's there, not just passing it by. And a statement from the movie that she made, I don't know what the context is that I love to walk the same trail every day to see what I missed the previous day. And does that sound familiar? I mean, I come and walk the same trails every day, and I've talked previously about how I don't see it as the same trail. I always see something new every day. Things are changing. Every day is fresh, and even walking the same trail again is fresh every day. And I guess it surprised me. I didn't realize all the resonances that I would say. And to me, it's like, because that is what happens when each one of us sees truth, because there is one truth, right? That truth is one. I've talked about that. There's not different truths. And when people stop long enough, their thinking mind, and just observe and pay attention long enough, that truth is there for everyone to see. The truth, not my truth, your truth, Mary Oliver's truth, but just the truth. Many poets have seen it. Many religious people have seen it, but when it's written down and, in a book, and then someone tries to learn about nature through a book, it's the same as like trying to learn about spirituality, if we want to use that word, in any book or by someone telling you. There's only one way to learn about nature, and that's to get out and be in it and see it and walk through it and feel it and touch it and experience it. And the difference between that and what like Mary Oliver does is she has the gift of writing it down, right? The way she writes it down, even though words are limited instruments that we've talked about endlessly, there is a certain resonance with words, a meaning behind the words, a pale glimmer of the truth, I think, that I've talked about before. You know, the words themselves don't have meaning, but they can evoke meaning in you. And I think a poet is gifted with evoking deep meanings with their words. They understand what resonates, and when they use these words artfully, it may not contain the words themselves, which are either sound vibrations or ink on paper, has no meaning, but there is a relationship, you know, of resonance, I like to say, that somehow the words can resonate, and perhaps some pale glimmer of the truth comes through the words. And I would say Mary Oliver is better at that than others, right? She has a way of speaking, and I think some of this came from the trauma in her life. She went to nature to escape her own sorrows as a young girl that was suffering abuse, and she found solace in nature. And she said there were two things that saved her, and one was the beauty of the natural world, and the other were dead poets. So she loved Walt Whitman. It was her favorite poet. She said she had three favorite poets: Whitman, Whitman, and Whitman. So if you want to know sort of her biggest influence, look up Walt Whitman, who also spoke of nature, and I have to remind myself of his own poetry and go back and maybe read some of what he wrote. But if you have any opportunity to listen to Mary Oliver's poems or read any of her books, I guess more than anyone, more than any book, and I think I brought this up in my previous video about her and other Buddhists. I talked about some of the books I read. I would recommend her book probably over any other book. Any of her books, right? Or all of her books. Read them. And then get out and do what she did, which is get into the world and write your own poetry. Even if you never touch pen to paper or finger to key on the keyboard, writing your own poetry is just observing the beauty in this world. I mean, I think it's kind of ironic that several of my last videos have been focused on beauty. I have the titles of the videos themselves talk about beauty, and I had completely forgotten about, or thought, you know, maybe it was in my subconscious, which also came up, but I had sort of forgot about Mary Oliver at the moment, you know, recently, and but I was saying a lot of the same things that she says, right? And I don't know, something about that was really interesting, and the fact that to really live in this world, like, we must understand beauty. And when she said she was saved by the beauty of this world, and remember we talked about the beauty of this world being love, you know, that when you see this world clearly, that is beauty and that is love, and that love saved her, right? You can say that too, that intelligence of the universe that is there, because that's what's beautiful. When you see the intelligence of the universe, when you see the love of this universe through nature, which can sometimes be harsh, and we can never forget that, but when you see that love and compassion and intelligence of this world that we live in, not human intelligence, not even human love, just love, right? That is much higher than human love, which is often just physical or emotional. Love is a much more powerful thing. That is what saved Mary Oliver. But I would say that she was also suffered a lot in her life. Even as she was writing her poetry, she suffered a lot. And this documentary, which I highly recommend watching, it's available on Apple TV or on Fandango at the moment for a very reasonable rental or purchase price. I think I paid $13 or $14 to purchase it, because I will watch this again. And I think I talked in the last video about how I do like learning or listening about people's lives and how they've lived them. And Mary lived her life and in her way, and it's over now, but we can learn so much, you know, more. Learn not the facts we gain from someone else's life, but just learn to live our own life. You know, even that one phrase, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Right? You could break that down, and we could go into that phrase just like we go into anything else to find the truth of it. And to go into that, we could examine the words and see what that means to us. And you know, maybe we will later, I don't know. But that should evoke something in you, you know. And I think what it could evoke is this sense of, are you living your life the way, are you living your life fully? Are you just a machine, you know, going about routine, mundane daily activities, day after day after day, the same patterns that you're following? Or are you seeing the newness of every day? Are you, you know, because that we talked about that every day is creation. You know, creation isn't something that happens once and is over. Every day is a new day, created in every moment. And if you are aware, then you are aware of creation always, not just aware of, say, the creation once, you know, the Big Bang, or, you know, in the beginning there was darkness, you know, I mean, however we want to look at creation. Creation isn't a thing that happened once. It's a thing that's always happening. If you see what creation is, and, you know, seeing yourself and nature as it is, you know, how to see that creation, and also that creation is beautiful. Again, it's intertwined with beauty, love, compassion, if you see it. So what are you going to do with your life? What do you plan to do? And it's interesting that she used the word plan. You know, I am often not a planner. I'm not a big planner. And I would say the planning part we have to be very careful of, because that brings in thought. And if thought is planning what to do with your life, then you could be in trouble, right? Because you could be going down the paths that this limited thought is carrying you. But I think that some of the trouble in Mary Oliver's life may be a reflection of that. You know, to see truth and to live truth are two different things. Well, they're not if you really see truth. I think we've talked about this before. To really see truth, truth acts. Then you live truth, right? When truth acts, you are living truth. You are not words. But if you don't see truth deeply enough, then you're only seeing the words, the superficial aspect of it. And I would say, as deeply as Mary saw truth, I feel like there was a gap, right? It was close, but not sort of all the way, because, you know, when you look at how she lived her life, you know, she spent her life with this partner, Molly, until she passed away in 2005, and then met someone else that a lot of people said was not a healthy relationship. She moved away from the town that she loved, Provincetown, because of this woman and said later she regretted it. It's like she was seeking relationships. You know, she felt that she was very attached, right, to her partner, Molly. And then with her passing became very distraught and just was seeking something to take that place. And again, these are the frailties of the human heart, I guess you would say, that came upon her just like they do everyone else. So she suffered, you know, a lot of the, we always say we're all the same, we're all of the human mind, we all understand all these emotions and all of what is said here, but she, I would say, fully see the beauty of the world, because that beauty would have saved her more so than that, you know, had she seen it. Like, she wouldn't have felt completely empty. She was also a heavy smoker, a heavy drinker, so her body, you know, and this, I think she lived a double life in a lot of ways. She was out in nature and saw the beauty of nature and described it wonderfully. But then in her own personal life, I think she separated a lot of that. She didn't, I don't know, she had a great way of words, but a lot of times she didn't live those words. And even a great poet can get caught in that. They can be very observant, right? See so much, and then, you know, when she's in nature, but then walk out of nature back to where the city or where she lived, and then forget that, you know, or, you know, not see that beauty in her everyday life. And I feel like that, you know, was part of her turmoil that she dealt with, which is just what it means to be human and to be alive, and everybody is subject to that. But you know, I haven't worked my way through the entire documentary, and I have to admit I didn't know a tremendous lot about her life prior to this, watching this video. I knew some. I knew she was from Ohio. I knew about her partner Molly. I knew some of her troubles, her traumas. But there's a lot in here that where people, like John Waters was a very good friend of hers. He worked at her bookstore. I think that was his first gig when he went to Provincetown a long time ago. And she helped him with his life, and obviously he became a film producer and is known for many other things. But he talks very fondly of her in this documentary, but also says things like she had a lot of troubles, you know, that she never got to, you know, that she never dealt with, I guess you might say. And I do think nature alone could have saved her, right? Had she truly seen deeply enough her connection with nature, then I think that some of the destructive parts of her life may not have taken over as they did. But I don't know. I'm not, who knows? No one knows another's life. No one can all you know is the life you're living, right? And so you can't conjecture about someone else's life and what led them to where they are and what traumas they may have experienced and how that affected them. I mean, the mind can be conditioned, the brain can be conditioned in many ways that we don't fully understand. So it is what it is, right? In that way, and that pain sometimes is, as we've talked about, is intertwined with the beauty. Beauty and terror sort of go hand in hand. And so to say that her life was all, you know, puppies and rainbows, I mean, that's not true of anyone's life. But she still saw the beauty, and she wrote it down. And that beauty saved her from, I don't know what her life would have been like without it, right? She would have been, she was unknown even as a poet. She was poor, often had no money to even eat. I think she would even take eggs from like seagulls out on the beach to eat when she really had no money for food or anything. And but still never wavered from her walks in nature, her observations of nature, her poetry. But again, that, you know, that striving even for popularity or striving to be known, you know, is the ego of the artist that even Mary Oliver probably suffered from. In that it's one thing to observe truth, to see truth. It's another to want to be known for that, you know, to want to be famous, to want to be one of the dead poets, which she now is a member of the Dead Poet Society, you know, one of the greatest. And often the life of an artist can be very tragic. So, and the most tragic thing of all is to be so close to truth, but then to not embrace truth, right? Or to not have truth embrace you. Like, to be so close to that, to see it, but then just to be just not fully there, you know, in that that seeing of beauty. Because in that seeing of beauty is joy, and you're not going to then seek out destructive behavior in your life. You're not going to need to smoke the cigarettes and drink and cover up whatever pain you might be feeling, because you'll understand that. And maybe that's the one, you know, just occurred to me, right? She's always looking out and sometimes in, but like if she looked at herself with that same very perceptive eye that she had, then things may have been different, right? She was very observant of nature, and she understood her place in nature, maybe intellectually, but had she seen herself, and I think she avoided seeing herself, right? She ran from herself. There were parts of her she didn't talk about until late in her life, and that I think had she turned her gaze inward, perhaps some of that, she could have seen the beauty even in the pain, you know, the beauty in what she had suffered as being just part of this struggle of life that everyone endures, no matter who you are, the poorest person or the richest person, or, you know, wherever you live in poverty-stricken India or Africa, or whether you live in the middle of New York City, the struggles are the same. The internal struggles are the same. The external struggles may be different, but the internal struggles that come from the mind are universal. So, I guess, you know, I have, like I said, I'm in no position, I can't judge or have any opinion whatsoever about what she should or shouldn't have done. All of that, again, is it's the thinking mind, right? The mind that says this or that, or is analyzing or proposing. It's counterfactual because there's nothing that can be changed. All that has happened. It is the past. It's not going to change anything. To wonder what could have been, what could, you know, if things had been this or that, as opposed to what they were, is just conjecture, you know? And it really does lead nowhere, but it's still, one wonders, right? One wonders. It's what the brain does. It just wonders. It imagines, it conceives, it turns things over. And I see my brain doing that, right? I see this brain doing that. But again, I don't hold on to that. You know, it's what the brain does. So you can't blame it for doing its job. It's the importance you give to that. That when you see that is just the process of thinking occurring, right? Making connections, surmising, analyzing, image making. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the brain has evolved to do that. But it's then how the life is lived, given that knowledge, and given that can't obscure one from direct perception of truth. Right? So as great as this documentary is, as great as her poems are, you have to see them as just what they are. Just artifacts of living. You know, there's artifacts of living. It's like anything that stays behind when someone passes away is like an artifact, just like an archaeological artifact buried in the ground that has to be dug up later, and just as lifeless. You know, the things buried in someone's life, like a life is lived and then it's over. And when it's over, to talk about that person's life is even just, it's fanciful imagination. It means nothing. What meant something was Mary Oliver was alive. She lived her life and she died. And that life is over, never to be on this earth again. You know, that was her one wild and precious life of Mary Oliver, and she lived it, and she lived it truly, you know, to what she thought she had to do and be. And she was very courageous and very, you know, just an amazing person. So yeah, I guess I had something in particular I wanted to talk about today, which was her and her poetry. And I mean, I could read her poetry, but I don't think that's necessary here. I think, you know, look up at least A Summer's Day, and actually look on YouTube for videos of her reading her own poetry. That's the best. Or even other people reading it, because I think sometimes seeing how poetry can affect other people, can have an effect on someone else so deeply. In fact, if you start watching this documentary, the very first scene shows Stephen Colbert trying to recite A Summer Day, and he can't, you know, he chokes up after the first line of the poem, which is, "Who made this world?" I don't have it memorized, but it's like, "Who made the swan?" And you know, it goes on from there. It is a poem I probably should memorize because I love it, but I just love listening to it. I don't hang on to things, as I've mentioned before, so a lot of times I don't remember things because I don't need to retain it. You can look it up, you can listen to it, and every time it evokes that same, in me, sense of wonder at the world. And it's a beautiful poem. A lot of people really like it. And like I said, that quote that I've been repeating here about your one wild and precious life is the very end of the poem. If you read that poem and it means nothing to you, then I would just forget it. No, don't look up any more about Mary Oliver. Don't watch the documentary, because if that poem doesn't move you, then you're just not seeing it. You know, you're not seeing what she saw, and for whatever reason it's not resonating with you, and nothing else that she wrote would. I think that's one. Well, I guess I can't come to that conclusion, but I would say I think it's very representative of her work, and you either get it right away or you don't. I feel like, you know, it's similar to an insight, you know, which just occurred to me. Maybe that's another insight. That like when you hear a poem like that, it's either going to evoke something in you or it's not. There really is no in between. And although it could be that maybe it won't evoke anything in you now, but like maybe 10 years from now, you have some more life experience or something changes, and then it does evoke something in you later. Because you need some sort of, you know, life experience to even understand the meaning of words, what they mean. Because otherwise, like we said, words have no intrinsic meaning. They only gain meaning by our understanding of the meaning behind each word, and that only comes through our own experience in life. Otherwise, words have no meaning. But to go back to Stephen Colbert, he starts trying to read the poem. He can't get through it, and then I think it's actually pretty ingenious what they do. Then later on in the documentary, they show the second take of him trying to read the poem. He gets further, but still can't quite make it all the way to the end. And I imagine maybe later, maybe a third take or a fourth take, or however many takes it took, they may get to him reading the entire poem without becoming overly emotional. that's what's amazing to me, though, that a poem can just evoke such a feeling within you that to bring you to tears. You know, what is that doing? Like, it's something deep inside you is being touched. You know, something that isn't being touched in other ways, that often is neglected, maybe not seen. You know, we said the subconscious mind, as we said yesterday, it's all one mind, but there's parts we pay attention to, parts we don't pay attention to. If you pay attention to the whole, nothing is hidden. But I think most people don't pay attention to the whole. There's much that is hidden in the subconscious, deeply. That when a poem like this reaches down into that darkness, and something that is there and can be touched but is not being touched by the normal, monotonous way of living, the mechanical way of life, where you can just get lost in daily activities, nothing new is happening, you're not seeing anything new. You know, if your life becomes that, a monotonous, mechanical process, then you're dead already. If you don't every day, you know, I don't know what to say, live your life, right? That one wild and precious life that you have. And even in that poem, she says, what else could I have done? To imply, like she said, she spent a day walking in the woods, and she's like, what else could I have done? And you know, that's what I do. You know, I walk, sometimes I spend hours walking in the woods. That's life, you know. It's not striving to be rich or famous or to have a big house or whatever. That is not life. That is ideation. That is your mind, the brain, creating images of what you want your life to be. And living is in the moment, only in the moment, only when you're walking around in the park. Okay, so I think I need to find her poem, because I keep talking about it. A Summer's Day by Mary Oliver. So let's read her poem. Okay, this is not a good image. I was trying to find a good image of the poem. Oh, this is good. And also my eyes are blurred because I can't see right, but I will do my best here. The summer day. Who made this world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last? And too soon? And then tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And that's the end. And I mean, if I had to pick probably my favorite poem from my favorite poets, or as far as I'm concerned, this is it. This is my favorite poem, because it feels like she's speaking to me. That crazy guy who walks through the woods every day, who does what she is saying, kneeling down in the grass, paying attention to the grasshopper, not knowing what praying is, but knowing how to kneel down. I mean, that is so powerful, right? I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down. That is extremely powerful, because that is what we've been saying. what we've been discovering through our conversations is the power of paying attention. And the falling down, right? To fall down, like that has a lot of meaning, right? To fall down, one, means to get down to the earth and see what's there. That we're always up here, not down there, you know? We're always in the clouds, in our mind. And the ground is what's real, what's under our feet. So to fall down, I mean, I'm just, you know, just talking about what these words mean to me, but to fall down can also mean getting down to the earth that is our mother, and seeing that as for what it is, being real. And you know, it can also mean falling down just in amazement, right? When you fall to your knees, like sometimes it can be because, you know, sometimes people that experience severe emotion, whether positive or negative, right, they fall down to their knees because they can't stand anymore. You know, they may find out someone they love just passed away. You know, that sadness can bring them to their knees. Something terribly sad. Also something joyous, right? People get on their knees to propose. Or if something is, you know, something really glorious happens to someone and they're overly joyed. I think that is also an occasion. So I know what it is to pay attention, to fall down, right? And then she says, into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, you know. So again, to touch the earth. You know, it's interesting that even the Buddha, when, you know, the story of the enlightenment of the Buddha, which I've brought up many times, is connected to nature. That there's always a connection to nature, I think, with all spiritual, truly spiritual, whatever you want to call it, stories. But the story of the Buddha always resonated with me more so than probably any other story that I knew from any other religious figure, because he, you know, sat under a Bodhi tree on the ground, on the earth, protected by the tree in some way. I think it was summer, full moon. There's always descriptions of nature, you know, with these stories, and I think that it's not incidental. You know, the power of nature cannot be underestimated. That the Buddha obtained enlightenment, if you believe that story, in nature, under a full moon in the summertime, so the insects were chittering away just like they are now. He sat down under a tree, the protection of a tree, you know, a tree. Why under a tree? You know, you can, you know, why did he choose a tree? You know, and it's like our oldest ancestor, maybe, you know, the tree is wise, the tree is solid, it connects to the ground, it doesn't strive for anything. A tree represents stillness and solidity and strength and unwavering purpose, without being arrogant, aggressive, you know, without even thinking, right? There's no thought in a tree. It doesn't think. It doesn't have a brain in the way we do to think. It just is a tree. And it doesn't feel the need to be anything other than that. And then also of importance in the Buddhist story of enlightenment, by the way, Mary Oliver wrote a poem about the Buddha. So I won't read that one, but she did write that, about Buddha's last words. So just you could check out a lot of her poems. You'll come across all this. But I think another element from the Buddha's story that's relevant here is that when Mara, you know, sort of the ruler of this world of desire that we live in, was tempting the Buddha. And I always think it's interesting that there was the temptation of Buddha by Mara, and in the story of Jesus, right, he was in the desert being tempted by the devil in a similar manner. Another connection, right? In the desert, out in nature, Jesus was, when, if you want to say, he achieved his enlightenment, right, by fasting, by being out there in the wilderness and alone. Notice in both circumstances they are alone. You know, they are alone. But the Buddha was being tempted by Mara in all these different ways. And then when Mara said, by what right do you have to obtain enlightenment, to obtain the ultimate wisdom? What gives you that right? And, the Buddha reached down and touched the earth. And the story is that the earth shuddered and shook. And in that moment, all things were one. The Buddha, the earth, all animals, everything obtained enlightenment. It wasn't the Buddha that obtained enlightenment. It was like the entire earth, the entire, cosmos in some sense, woke up in that minute from its own darkness to see truth. Right? Maybe the universal mind itself woke up in that moment. And but by touching the earth, saying the earth is my witness. Because I think the way that Mara put it, he said, "Who is your witness? Who will witness this, or will say you have a right to do to this?" And the Mara basically touched the earth, indicating, or the Buddha touched the earth, that the earth is his mother. The earth is real. The earth is what's real, not Mara. Mara was in his mind. Right, the demons of his mind that were coming at him, the desire that we all have. The earth is the way to become rooted in the earth, right? A tree is rooted in the earth, and in that way the Buddha was rooted in truth, the truth of the earth itself. That was his authority, right? There was no other authority that was necessary. And I think that's very important. And again, the nature connection, right? The natural connection of all of this that plays a role in, the truly religious mind must be one that understands nature, that sees nature, the truth that's all around us, right? That this truth of nature has evolved and contains, or is an expression, a manifestation of truth. Right, that the truth takes many forms, or the truth itself may be amorphous, may have no form, but it manifests in an infinite number of ways, which are all the life forms that arise. The rocks itself, the rocks of the ground, are also the same. We don't distinguish between living and non-living. I mean, it's all the same, right? It's just a continuous manifestation of truth, whatever that truth is, which by itself can't be named or discussed or talked about, but the manifestations of truth can be. Right? We can see the tree and describe the tree. We can see the grass and describe the grass, or even the human being. Those can be described. Never, the description is not the truth, but the truth manifests, and then that's all we see, though. But you have to see behind those manifestations, because no one of those manifestations is truth, right? Which is where we get stuck, because we may think one is, that one, person is the truth, right? Or Jesus, right? Or the Buddha, that they are the truth. They are a manifestation of the truth. And it may have manifested in them more expressionately, in some different way that allowed them to speak the truth more clearly, to see the truth more clearly, but it is nothing that isn't within all of us. That we are all of us, manifestations of that same truth. We are that truth. And that is why seeing who we are, by just observing ourselves, we observe truth, all of it. That in that grain of sand, we can see the entire universe, not just part, right? If you go into anything deep enough, you find everything. And that's what we're doing, right? It doesn't matter what you decide to go into. If you go deep enough, it is all, since everything is connected, everything's interconnected, the entire universe is the same. It doesn't matter where you start. If you go deep enough in any way, right, you will find everything. Like we said, to be alone is to be all one. So in that aloneness, then everything can be known. And you could say that is the ultimate wisdom or the ultimate knowledge. Not knowledge that comes from the accumulation of fact, but the understanding of the whole, which is the ultimate truth. Right? Because the fragments of truth are what's all around us, but the ultimate truth is not any one fragment. It's all of this. Like everything. Like the birds, the trees, the planet, us, the cosmos, the stars, the space between the stars, the time, the universe itself, infinitely, expansive, and the time and all of that, if you just, taken as a whole, is the truth. All of that is occurring now, and is created anew in every minute, every second, and is there to be seen. All of it, in any moment of time, as long if the obstructions to seeing that truth are removed, the barriers to seeing. Right, and that is all it is. It's like, we talked about how to see you just need to open your eyes. Mary Oliver opened her eyes in nature and saw a lot. But just like seeing through a glass window, that glass can be cloudy. It may not be clear. And that's how we see the world often, is through some filter that is not the pure, unadulterated truth. And that the cloudiness comes from our conditioning, from our past, from the thoughts that interfere with the seeing process, the seeing clearly. That is not the superficial seeing that we see all the time. Light's coming into our eyes all the time. But we're constantly processing and thinking and converting what we're seeing into some twisted version of the past. That the past is always coming into play with the present, interfering with the seeing of the now. So, someone, I think it was Ram Dass, I believe, that said, "Be here now." I think that was the title of one of his famous books, right? And those words are powerful, but if they're just words, they mean nothing. And people may say, well, of course I'm here, and of course it's now. So what does that have? What meaning does that have? It's just stating a truth that is already there. I'm here, so I can't be anywhere else. I'm being here, and I'm now. I can't be in any other time than now. So how is that truth, right? How is that? It's because if you stop at the words are barriers to understanding, right? Those words, can evoke something, but also can be the stopping point. Because you stop there when you hear the words and you think you're done, and you're not done. Inquiry it doesn't end. Inquiry is in every moment a seeing of what is. It's not a seeing until you reach a conclusion and then an ending, and then you feel that you've finished, you've completed the project. There's no completion of inquiry. Inquiry is not an ending. Inquiry is constant paying attention of everything that is, because everything is changing all the time. So there's no reaching a conclusion, because you can't reach a conclusion about something that's constantly changing. How can you? You can only see the constant change. You can see that the truth is the constant changing, the constant transformation that never reaches a steady, fixed point, which is why you can never understand it with knowledge. Even infinite knowledge can't understand what's constantly changing, because it's constantly changing. Therefore, never staying the same. So you can't pin it down. You can't pin the truth down, which is also why the truth of the past is not the truth of now. The truth of another is not your truth. It's not truth, right? There's no truth of another that can be expressed. Truth is just seeing what is, without the past interfering. And there's nothing more than that. It's why it's not complicated. It doesn't require anything. What is the problem is everything that gets in the way of that seeing. That's the problem. That's why. It's not about seeing what you imagine truth to be, or call it God, right? We could, whatever word you want to pick, truth, God, reality. You can't see the truth or see God through any words that anyone has ever given you. It has to be what's around you now. If the truth or God is in everything, then to see that, you have to open your eyes to what's there now, not what anyone has told you. You'll get lost. Then all you see are the words, the description. So I don't like to use the word God because it carries with it all the tradition. You know, that everyone has their own idea of who God is, but that is the very trouble. Everyone has their own idea of who, what this God that we call is, which is why that word really needs to be thrown out. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to find what's sacred. Just don't use that word, because that word, which God? Which sect of Christianity that interprets or sees or states or believes God is a certain way are you calling God? And then Christianity is, you know, then go to Buddhism. Well, there's no really God in Buddhism, but in Hinduism there's thousands of gods, right? So which God? And African religions have God. I mean, infinite number of gods, because these are all, and I hate to break it to you, creations of human mind. Human beings have created God in their own image, not the other way around. And that may shock a lot of people, but it's the truth. And to see it's the truth, see how many different varieties of God there are. Take your pick. It's like, you know, Baskin & Robbins, 1,001 flavors of ice cream. It's like there's that many ideas of God. So what is the meaning of that? It means nothing. Because there's no, when you just see how diverse the ideas of God are, it doesn't, this is why to use that word means nothing. Now to use it, you use it to a Christian, they're immediately going to associate it with their version, depending on, you know, are they Protestant or Catholic or Baptist or Methodist or Jehovah's Witness, or, I mean, whatever, right? They each have their own flavor, their own set of rules that they've developed. Can't you see that that is not truth? Like, that's just, can't you see that? Doesn't matter what you believe. Just, doesn't that cast enough doubt on what you believe to say, I don't know for sure? There's always doubt. With belief, there's always doubt. With facts, there is no doubt. Right? This is the problem with having beliefs, because beliefs can be shaken. Beliefs, there is always some small, no matter how much you say you believe strongly in something, you know that's not true. You know that belief is not absolute. That you want to believe for the sake of security, for having your fear go away, for whatever. You just want to believe that that is true, because, well, if I gave up on that, then what? I'm back to nothing. I'm back to floating around in the void, and I don't have anything to hang on to. Well, that's where you should be. Floating around in the void with nothing to hang on to. But you want to hang on to that belief, when in fact the very thing you need to do is let go and float. Float without any, to be free, right? No attachment, nothing tethering you. You're like a dog tethered to a stake in the ground, right? That can only go so far around that stake, you know, and no matter, it can go in circles and twist itself up in knots around that stake in the ground. But when you hold on to something, even a belief, you're tethered to the ground, just like that dog. If you want to be free, you have to let go of that belief, and it's, now there's no leash on you. Right now you are free to explore. Letting go of all that, now you are free to find what is sacred, if anything is sacred. But you can't do it from the words, you can't do it from the past that you have. It has to start from a place of freedom. And in the place of freedom, when you're honest to yourself, and the truth is what you see. The truth is, now you're rooted in fact. You're rooted in what is happening, what is real, what is true, what is fact. And you have to acknowledge that fact is all there is, and let go of all belief. Because, and this is what's happened, when you start in a place of belief, you end up in doubt. Because at some point or another, something will come along, someone will die close to you, or some tragedy will occur, and you'll say, why did God do this to us? And how could God take my child away? Or how could God... So then now your belief is shaken. right? Because you thought God was going to protect you from everything, from the horrors of the world, and he didn't protect you. Why didn't he protect you? You thought he would. Maybe that version of God that you had as your great protector, I mean, God can't protect everyone. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The world is full of danger. People die, people get sick. Like, that is the reality, that is the fact. So to believe that somehow you pray to God, you will not suffer from those aspects of life, that isn't truly religious. Truly religious is to see that the world is full of suffering, to see that all of this happens, that people die, family members die. We are here temporarily, we are then not here, to see who we really are, not believe in some idea of who we are. To see that truth is the most liberating of all, because that is truth. Why would one want to not be with truth? And then all of it makes sense, because it's all together. The suffering, the beauty, the terror, it's all part of the same thing, right? And so it's not a foreign thing anymore, and it's not a belief. You can't be shaken from the truth. You know, the sun rises and sets, you see that. No one's going to tell you that isn't happening. So in the same way, when truth is seen through fact, not belief, there's no shaking it. It's unwaverable, right? And that is what can happen if one sees clearly. But it only, the seeing clearly is the hard part, because we want to see through all the knowledge we've accumulated. So you have to see without that knowledge. You have to see cleanly and purely, with no interpretation by the brain of what you're seeing. That is the truth. That is what's sacred. That's what's beautiful. You know, Mary Oliver saw some of that, maybe not all of that, and it was probably that seeing of a part and not of the whole that wasn't truly liberating for her, right? Because to see the truth wholly is completely liberating. There's no going back. You know, it's one way in some sense, because when you see that truth, it reveals, and it's a fact. It's not something that you believe in or don't believe in, and it can't be debated, right? The truth is the same for everyone, to see the same truth. There's no my belief, your belief, and now we fight each other because we have different beliefs. Like, that doesn't happen, because the truth is seen by all. It's the same truth. It's the one truth. It's the unwavering truth of all, right? And that is in nature. It's in us. It's in the rocks, in the car that I'm about to get into. That is it. So I think we'll end there. I guess I will later finish this documentary about Mary Oliver, because I think it's very interesting, and you know, it's funny, happy, sad. I mean, to hear it. So all of this and all of that is part of life. All of that is part of her life. That's part of my life. Part of everyone's life. And that is just the nature of things. So, all right, I guess we'll call it quits there, and I will talk to you another day. Until next time.